When it comes to raw feeding pets, safety is super important. You're not just pouring dry food into a bowl anymore. There are important things you need to remember, not only when you're feeding homemade raw food, but when you're shopping for meat and preparing their meals too. Let's begin with the first safety tip, knowing which meats are safe to feed. The base of your pet's raw diet should be meat, bone, and organs, which you can find at grocery stores, butchers, or Asian markets. However, many owners worry about store-bought meat and whether it's safe to feed their pets due to things like parasites. But here's some good news. In countries like the US, Canada, and EU, parasites are much less of a concern due to thorough meat inspections, temperature-controlled environments, and pre-freezing. So the risk of parasites in store-bought meat is extremely low. But don't just feed every protein that you can get your hands on, because there are a few out there that can be dangerous. I'm talking about certain wild animal meats. In general, wild-caught meat is extremely nutritious, high-quality meat, but there are a few animals that may carry diseases and toxins, and freezing can't eliminate them. The first is wild boar meat. Wild boar can carry Odrzyjewski's disease, which is a freeze-resistant virus and is 100% fatal in pets. The second is carnivorous animal meat, like cougar, alligator, and bear. Animals low on the food chain absorb small amounts of toxins from the plants and insects that they eat. When a predator eats these animals, it then ingests those toxins, which accumulate the higher the animal is on the food chain. These heavy metals and toxins can cause organ damage and even cancer in the body. So, safety tip number 1, avoid wild boar and carnivore meat. The next safety tip is all about bones. Bones can be intimidating for beginners, especially since many vets warn us to never feed bones. But if you follow the safety tips that I'm about to tell you, the bones that you feed your pet will be completely safe. Let's take a look at a few common raw meaty bones that you might find at the grocery store, butcher shop, or Asian market. We've got chicken and turkey necks, chicken feet, chicken wings, beef marrow bones, lamb ribs, chicken drumsticks, and a chicken carcass with the meat removed. Can you tell which one of these are not safe to feed? Here's a hint. One of them is way too large for even the largest breed dog to chew up safely. Beef marrow bones. The marrow inside is great to feed, but the bones are unfortunately too thick and could cause teeth fractures and choking. So safety tip number 2, never feed whole beef bones. Besides beef bones, there is one more bone that I mentioned that is not safe to feed. Can you point it out? Here's another hint. It's a little different looking than all the rest. The chicken carcass without meat on it. This carcass is great for making bone broth, but it's unsafe to feed due to it being bare. Raw bones need meat attached to serve as a cushion as your pets chew. This helps prevent teeth fractures and punctured gums. So safety tip number 3, avoid feeding bare bones. Alright, the next safety tip is also super important to keep in mind when shopping, and it has to do with fish. Fish are a vital part of a raw diet because they provide critical nutrients that are commonly low in raw meals. Omega-3s like EPA and DHA are 2 of these nutrients and are easily provided by oily fish. And fish like mackerel, sardines, and salmon are also high in vitamin D, which is low in most meats but essential for bone health. But there is one type of fish that you need to be careful of. Raw salmon from the Pacific Northwest waters. These salmon can harbor a hidden parasite that's usually harmless on its own. However, when infected with a bacterium called Neorickettsia helminthioca, this can trigger salmon poisoning, which can be fatal in dogs. Currently, there haven't been any cases of this affecting cats. Freezing can eliminate this parasite, but only if your freezer stays at -4 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and the meat remains frozen for 3 weeks. So safety tip number 4, avoid feeding fresh raw salmon from the Pacific Northwest. If you're worried about freezing fish properly, there's always the option of cooked or canned fish, which brings us to safety tip number 5. Canned fish are an easy alternative to raw fish and a great addition to a raw meal. It's also perfectly safe to feed, under a few conditions. As you can see, there's quite a selection here. We've got fish canned in oil, sauce, mustard, and salted water. Are any of these safe to feed? Sauce contains a lot of spices, so it's best to avoid fish canned in sauce. Oil is okay, but only as a last resort because it's high in fat. Fish canned in water is my top choice, but this is where we need to remember safety tip number 5. Be careful of the sodium content in canned fish. Sodium is a natural micromineral that's necessary in the diet. However, too much can make pets ill. Fish canned in water tends to have added salt, so compare your options and choose the one with the lowest sodium content. Try to keep sodium under 25 milligrams per 28 grams when feeding canned fish. Since we're on the subject of seafood, let's talk about safety tip number 6. Some nutrients can be low in raw diets, depending on the ingredients, and a great animal source that provides these nutrients are shellfish. Blue, black, or Chilean mussels help provide manganese to the diet, and oysters help boost zinc and copper. You'd think these should be fed raw, just like the rest of the ingredients in the diet, but actually, it's the opposite. Shellfish are filter feeders that can accumulate the Toxoplasma gondii parasite when filtering seawater. This parasite can cause GI upset, fever, and even seizures, especially in immunocompromised pets. So safety tip number 6, cook shellfish before feeding it. If you see shellfish in the frozen seafood section, check the packaging to see if they've been pre-cooked or steamed. All canned shellfish have been pre-cooked. Alright, let's take our ingredients home and start prepping our pets' raw meals for the week. Raw meat can go bad pretty quickly when thawed for multiple days. And a common mistake among new raw feeders is delaying meal prep. This results in the meat sitting in the fridge for too long, and then spoiling. Raw meat only lasts a few days thawed in the fridge, so safety tip number 7 is to meal prep within 3 days of buying the meat, then put everything in the freezer. Now, for those of you who want to feed wild animal meat, like deer, game bird, and rabbit, there is an important step you need to take before feeding it. Remember when I said that store-bought meat has been pre-frozen to remove the risk of parasites in the meat? Well, this is not the case for wild-caught meat. You need to be the one to pre-freeze it before feeding it. So, safety tip number 8, freeze wild-caught meat at -4 degrees Fahrenheit or below for 3 weeks to eliminate any parasite risk. Since we're on the subject of prepping, what if you'd rather grind everything together in a big batch? Is this safe to do? I'm happy to say that pretty much everything can be ground up and mixed together in one big batch. But there is one thing that you have to remember to leave out of the grind. Raw fish that contain thiaminase. What's thiaminase? This is an enzyme that these raw fish contain that can inhibit the absorption of thiamine, or vitamin B1, and this can cause B1 deficiency. This enzyme is destroyed when the fish is cooked, but if you're feeding these fish raw, be sure to not include it in your grind. So safety tip number 9, never mix raw fish that contain thiaminase in your pet's grind. Alright, it's time to feed your pet their raw food. This is where safety tip number 10 comes in. Some pets may need their food to be presented differently than others to ensure their safety. For instance, pets that tend to eat quickly and gulp down their food may need everything chopped up into smaller pieces so they don't choke. Some may need a slow feeder bowl, or maybe even need to be hand-fed. So, safety tip number 10, monitor your pet while they eat. Now, if you don't feel like writing all of these tips down, I have them all in my raw feeding cheat sheet, which you can reference at any time to ensure you're raw feeding your pets safely. It also includes a lot of other helpful raw feeding tips and information as well. You can download yours in the link below.